16 in emotion regulation when I stopped the last video. So realize that this is about accumulating positive emotions. So this is in the mnemonics or acronym, it's part of ABC, please, in reducing vulnerability. So the A includes accumulating positive emotions, and there's accumulating short-term positive emotions by identifying pleasant events and positive things that are going to generate positive emotions, then being mindful of those things, letting yourself really take them in, notice a positive emotion, and notice if you have worries about positive emotions or worries about what you're thinking about, because those worries are going to bring it to an end prematurely sometimes. And you might think of this as sort of working on the life and death of a positive emotion, because people tend to cut off positive emotions. They're worried that they're going to end anyway, and that's going to be painful and disappointing, so why stick with it? And some people worry about they don't really think they deserve positive emotions. So these are all on the handouts and in the teaching materials about short term. And then there is a 3-page list of pleasant events. This goes way back to the beginning of CBT about treating depression, because the idea used to be that if you could get more pleasant events to happen, somebody would maybe get out of depression. Well, that wasn't entirely true, but it is partially true. And it is definitely, so there's this list of 225 possible pleasant events. People can look through and check off which ones they could imagine using, and then they can write down their own, just to start working on that, because the homework assignment is going to be to activate some of their short-term positive emotions by doing pleasant events. Then you get to handout 17, and that is more of the A, accumulating positive emotions, and this is accumulating positive emotions long-term. So what's the point of this? What's different is that, you know, when you pursue goals that matter to you in your life, pursue values that matter to you in your life, and get things to happen that matter to you in your life, they become the source of positive emotions that just keep coming. So it's different than sort of doing one pleasant event at a time. It's like pursuing something that may take a lot of work, but actually it's going to give back to you. So that's what this is about, is how to get into that. And Linehan has listed, again, she has a lot of 7-step things. So there's 7 steps to these long-term accumulating emotions. And they are, just to make a couple comments about them, first, it is to start to build the life you want now, to avoid avoiding, because most of us do avoid things that might be hard to do or might be painful to do, and yet they might be the things we need to do to build our lives. Identify values that are important. So some people don't know what goals to turn to that might be most valuable to them or most meaningful, and so there's an emphasis here of finding out or thinking through what your values are, and then finding goals in something to work on that's aligned with a value. And based on that, there's a handout after 17. There's handout 18 is about values and priorities. And it's to help people look at what we mean by values, attending to relationships, being part of a group, being powerful and able to influence others, achieving things in life, living a life of pleasure and satisfaction. There's about 13 or 14 different categories of values, and Linehan asks people to check off the ones that matter most to them, both the big ones and little ones, and then be going back to thinking, okay, so now identify one value to work on now. Maybe I'd like to get more pleasure and satisfaction into my life. Okay, identify a few goals related to this value. What am I going to do to get more pleasure in my life? And name them, like getting a job that's more pleasurable, or having leisure activities that bring pleasure and enjoyment. And then, having identified a few goals, pick one. I did this with someone once, and they realized they had avoided learning to drive. And this became the turning point moment that they actually got themselves to do this, because it was in line with their values. It was one of their goals. They had been avoiding it. And so then identify small action steps towards your goal. So you've got a goal now. What's the first thing you would do? Make a list of the things you would do step by step to get to that goal, and do the first thing. So the step 7 is to take one action step now. And there's some example given as you go through this handout. Like I say, the next handout is about values and priorities. This is a really good thing to stop and talk to people about what their values are and find out how different people's values are. Now, I said it's the ABC. ABC, please, are the ways to reduce vulnerability. So that's the A. The B, number what? 19, handout 19, build, mastery. And C is going to be cope ahead of time. So building mastery is just based on the research that shows that if you do something every day that just is at the edge of what you feel capable of doing, if you don't feel capable of doing much, it might be that you clean a room in your house. It might be that you respond to some email or mail. It might be that you make a phone call. It might be that you go take a walk. If you're already doing certain things in your life a fair amount more than that, maybe it's further out, more, something that challenges you, but it is possible, just a little bit of an edge, because then when people do that sort of thing and it's slightly challenging, they feel that they've accomplished something during the day. And if you do that day after day, you might become more resilient and feel better about yourself. Then C is coping ahead of time. And this is, imagining ahead of time what situation you're going to be in that's going to trigger difficult emotions. And then start to imagine what kind of skills you're going to need there or before you get there to address some of the things ahead of time so you don't get stuck right in the middle. Like, let's say you have a family situation that's difficult and you're planning to go to lunch because you've been invited to lunch with your family for some occasion on the weekend. And you know that when you go there, you're going to get caught in something, because it happens every time with your family, that starts to generate some painful emotions in you. So you might start to cope ahead by actually some practical strategy planning ahead of time about when are you going, with whom are you going, what are you going to do when you're there, is there anything you want to take with you? Just all kinds of questions about imagining, rehearsing ahead of time how it's going to be and what you might do to solve things. And by previewing it and imagining it and coming up with some possible solutions, you then might be in a better position to be more relaxed going in and also to end up with a better outcome. The next handout is the please part of ABC, please. All right? And this is taking care of your body, all these things that add to resiliency or lack of resiliency when it comes to managing emotions. So the PL is about physical illness. It's taking care of things in a timely way so that they don't get out ahead of you and have you get sick or have you become ill in such a way that you're more emotionally vulnerable. The E is balanced eating, the first E. And so that has to do with not eating too much or too little, starting to notice the correlation between things you eat and how you feel, and making a plan for staying away from foods that make you too emotional, and kind of keeping yourself in a balance. The A is to avoid mood-altering substances. To avoid mood-altering substances, stay off illicit drugs, use alcohol in moderation, basically so that you aren't going on and off drugs to regulate your emotions. Balancing sleep is the S. So this has to do with trying to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, trying to have it be as steady as possible, and keeping to a consistent sleep schedule, especially if you're having trouble sleeping, because this just leads to greater resiliency day by day. And finally, the last E is exercise. To get exercise regularly, do something every day up to 20 minutes or more, and maybe on certain days of the week do a little bit more. So these are things, these are things worth focusing on, even though you can't change these habits in a week of teaching skills, this particular skill. But to have people review them, think about them, report back on them, and then try to change one or two of them, or just be more aware, or take them into individual therapy, or decide if they want to pursue something more in terms of treatment of any of these things. This can be a real turning point skills week. The next two handouts are interesting protocols. I'll just alert you to, there's a nightmare protocol step by step. I'm not going to go over it right now, and we don't typically go over it if you have a normal length skills group, and a sleep hygiene protocol. So the nightmare protocol is an evidence-based protocol to help people with recurrent nightmare of certain kind. And the sleep hygiene protocol is stuff you've heard before, but it's just going over all those things to do to try to manage behaviorally to make it more likely that you're going to get some sleep. All right, next, we have the final section, which is handling really difficult emotions. Handouts for managing really difficult emotions. There's an overview, which as usual doesn't have a star on it, but it's important for you and it might help you to orient your class. Is that there's going to be three things we cover here. Mindfulness of current emotions is a skill. Managing extreme emotions is a sort of a protocol, a way of thinking about extreme emotions and what to do about them. And finally, troubleshooting emotion regulation problems and review. So, mindfulness of current emotions. This is a great skill. It requires somebody being a little bit balanced, because you want to become mindful of the emotions that are passing through. You have to sort of step back in your mind and notice, like any other mindfulness exercise, what emotions are passing through my mind. And if they're strong, like noticing they come and go in waves, and let them. It's allowing them to come and go in waves rather than having to cut them off. This is like an immensely important learning. Now imagine surfing on those waves. So it could be surfing, mindfulness, riding with imagery, riding waves of anger, riding waves of fear, riding waves of anxiety, right? Try not to block the emotion, try not to exaggerate or escalate the emotion. Don't try to get rid of it, don't try to keep it, don't try to amplify it. In other words, just let it be. The way with a good mindfulness practice of the breath, you just let the breath be. This includes practicing mindfulness of body sensations, which is part of the emotions, and noticing where they are and how they come and go, how long they last. Remember, you are not your own emotion. You're not your emotion. You are having emotions. Emotions are happening in you, but you are not them, and it can become a real problem if you identify yourself with your emotion, like I'm an angry person. Practice loving your emotion. Linehan puts that there. I really think just practice acknowledging, accepting, and being with my emotions. I don't always love my emotions, but I think that's what she means by that, is not to judge your emotions. Practice willingness, being willing to have emotions, willing to accept your emotions. Okay? So that's a good skill. You'll see more about how to do that. Managing extreme emotions is really just talking about this one important thing, that there's what's called a skills breakdown point, a point of distress and emotionality that is beyond the intensity level that allows you to use most of the skills we've been talking about. In which case you need to use special skills to bring down extremely high emotions, because you get past what she calls the skills breakdown point. You get past that, it's no point using some of these. Go right to the distress tolerance skills that you've already been over, and including the tip skills of tipping your body chemistry by temperature and intense exercise and progressive muscle relaxation and paced breathing. But it's using the crisis survival skills mainly. And then returning to mindfulness of current emotions from the last skill,